All right, man, peace. So, brothers, it seems as if Luka Doncic, the precocious but outstanding talent of the Dallas Mavericks, understands what the condition of the battle is going to be for his squad. He knows that the litmus test for their young team, which is comprised or led by him and Kristaps Porzingis, who they received in a trade from the New York Knicks, is that they make the playoffs. They have to make the playoffs. Some of his supporters might say, well, no, not really. They're still a young team. But based on the way in which many of the members of the NBA media talk about him, he knows that in order for him to fulfill a lot of the prophecies about him, or those prognostications, to put it lightly, he's going to have to lead his team to the playoffs at the very least, whether that be a 7th seed or an 8th seed. And that's why I state it would not surprise me if there are some major shocks this year when it comes to which teams make the NBA playoffs. I'm going to leave it at that for now. But it's going to be very competitive, especially in the Western Conference, when we sit back and think about how many teams are going to be competing for playoff spots. Because Minnesota, the Dallas Mavericks, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and maybe even the Golden State Warriors will be competing for those last 2 spots, though in the San Antonio Spurs as well. We'll see what happens. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Let's get to the Mavericks missing the playoffs for 3 straight seasons. But Luka Doncic is here, and he is confident in his team's chances to turn it around. Here's what Luka said when asked about his plans for this season. Quote, "I always like to say my plans are to win the championship."
Well, we know that ain't going to happen this year, so you can forget about that.
We'll make the playoffs, though. We must.
Good for him for understanding that. Based on how they cover him and what they say he's going to become, he knows that he has to lead his team to the playoffs this year. So good for him for understanding that.
Plan, and I think we'll make it. All right, Doncic saying the Mavs will make the playoffs this season.
I disagree that they will, but it would not shock me. I'll put it like that. As of right now, I'm not going to pick them as one of my 8 teams to make the NBA playoffs in the Western Conference. But if they do, it wouldn't shock me because it's going to be that competitive out west.
BS or real talk? Ooh. Man, all right. I know. All right. Finally happy, Nick.
Now, both of these people predict that the Dallas Mavericks are going to make the playoffs next year. So I hope that should the Mavericks not make the playoffs, that they have some real critique of Luka Doncic and that squad, assuming that he's able to play, say, 75 out of the 82 games. Because he will be deserving of criticism if his team does not make the playoffs.
I'm ready. I think Dallas is ready to take that step.
Okay.
And when you listen to the other guys around the league, the star players, they say Luka Doncic is the real deal.
Yeah.
So if you have him taking another step, losing all this weight this summer, getting better shape, Porzingis comes back, it's always tough off an ACL in that first year, but he can give them something with the core they already have in place. And I think Rick Carlisle is one of the very best coaches in the league. I think they can squeeze in that 7 or 8 seed in the West, but that.
Is that your head talking or is that your heart speaking? Because as of right now, especially when it comes to the Western Conference, we have to decide who's not going to make it. I'm sure that people are going to say OKC is out. But who else? Is it San Antonio? Is it Golden State? Because there are going to be multiple teams that will be competing for playoff spots this year who did not make it last year. Remember, the Lakers did not make the playoffs last year. They're going to be expected to compete for the playoffs. The Golden State Warriors, who knows how things go with them? I predict that they're going to compete very hard in the first half of the season. And depending on how healthy their team is going into the second half of the season and how soon they can get Klay Thompson back, that's going to determine how hard they push for the playoffs. But it would not shock me if they shut down their team in about mid-March if things are not going how they want them to go, or if they decide we're just going to fall back and chill this season because we've been through so much stress and had so much mileage put on our top players' legs over the course of the past 5 years.
Mean that the Thunder are long gone because they're rebuilding, but that would mean probably the Spurs may not make it, and the Spurs would appear to be a better team now than where they were throughout most of last season. So
why would you say the Spurs wouldn't make it then? You're pretty much starting to disintegrate your own argument because you're starting to understand that, yes, it's going to be very difficult for teams who did not make the playoffs last year to make it this year, unless there's some injury issue. Once again, we expect the Lakers to make the playoffs. OKC is going to be expected to not make the playoffs, but they're going to be more competitive than people think.
It's going to be tough for them, but I think they can do it because of Luka Doncic.
Yeah, I mean, Luka was incredible last season, and if he takes the step that we all...
Was he really incredible? Or did he have a very good start to a rookie campaign? and then start to peter out down the stretch.
Expect him to this year. There's no reason why the Mavericks shouldn't be in the playoffs, because if you look at the changing of the West, I mean, there are so many shuffling cards there.
This is one of these broads who needs to be seen and not heard. She said there's no reason why the Dallas Mavericks shouldn't make the playoffs last year. Are you aware that the 8th seed to make the NBA playoffs in the Western Conference last season won 48 games? The Dallas Mavericks barely broke 30 games last season. Now, of course, they've added Kristaps Porzingis, and we would expect Luka Doncic to become a better player this year. But is that going to be good enough to take them from a 30-win team to a 48, 49, 50-win team? That would be a huge quantum leap. As of right now, the Clippers, Lakers, Nuggets, Rockets, Warriors, Jazz, Spurs, Mavericks, Timberwolves, Trailblazers, and Thunder are 11 teams that will be competing for 8 spots. So just to touch on or to broach the notion that there's no reason why the Mavericks should make the playoffs, that's just idiocy.
Especially towards the bottom, like Nick said, some of those teams that we've counted on as just being there in the past very well might not be this year. And so I think that
sounds like wishful thinking.
With bringing in Kristaps Porzingis and this talented second-year guy in Doncic, I just think that that's going to be a recipe for success.
I mean, KP is more the X factor in this than me. Yes, Luka's going to be good, assuming he continues to enjoy good health. We assume he will build on his great rookie year. He's still going to be a second-year player, and there's still 4 other guys on the court, or when he's not on the court, 5 other guys on the court. I want to know what KP can do. I want to see how much he can hold up his health.
Well, the last time I saw Kristaps Porzingis, it looked like he's put on quite a bit of muscle. Whether or not that's going to help him in adding some longevity to his NBA career, who knows? When I look at Kristaps' physique, he just seems to have that recipe for disaster. He's always going to be someone who has nicks here and knacks there. His knees are going to start to break down probably in the next 5 years or so. He reminds me a lot of Yao Ming, just in many of his gesticulations and his body language, things of that nature, and also Sean Bradley. He clearly is more skilled than either one of them as an offensive player, but I do think that he's going to break down.
Through the whole season, I want to see those guys work together, but even if all that goes great.
And it wouldn't shock me if there are some issues on that team between Kristaps and Luka and trying to decipher who the quote-unquote alpha on the squad is going to be.
I think they have a chance to make the playoffs, but again, if you say they're going to make it, you have to talk about who you're going to take out. You mentioned the Spurs. Let's just talk about the West. We certainly expect the Clippers to make it.
Right.
I know the Lakers expect to make it. I know the Trailblazers, who made the Western Conference Finals, expect to make it. Denver expects to make it. That's 4. Houston expects to make it. We're up to 5. Utah expects to make it. We're up to 6. Who's my 7th? Golden State. Yes. So those 7 teams definitely not only expect to make it, but if any of those 7 lose in the first round, we talked about this earlier in the summer, that would be a huge loss for them, and 3 of them by definition would have to lose. So who that 8th team is, there's a lot more than just the Spurs, right, and the Mavericks competing for that.
Good job by you, Rachel Nichols. Even Rachel Nichols had to check this broad.
What?
Yeah, but I just don't think any other team besides the ones we've rattled off has the talent to do it. Maybe somebody surprises us, but I think that's where it comes in that 7th or 8th spot. Somebody's got to beat out somebody else, and I think it's going to be Dallas, potentially over San Antonio.
And I'll put one more team in there that I'm sure wants to make a splash, New Orleans.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure the Pelicans.
That is another team, a very interesting squad. I'm not quite sure if they're going to make the playoffs. If they did, it would surprise me, because once again, I think that it's going to take 45 to 46 wins to make the playoffs this year in the Western Conference. Not quite as much as last year, because I do think that the West is going to be deeper this year and better overall than it was last year, because I expect Phoenix to be a bit better. As you just cited, New Orleans is going to be a bit better. The Timberwolves are going to be a little bit better. So those teams are going to take 1 or 2 victories away from each of those playoff teams.
Well, now, who has had you on their bulletin board? The Timberwolves have had you on their bulletin board. Wolves. Now the Pelicans.
Reggie hasn't had me on the bulletin.
Also, the Sacramento Kings. Don't worry.
Sacramento Kings, that's another team. I forgot about them. The West is going to be crazy this year.
In New Orleans and Sacramento. And I guess San Antonio, too, since you said they were. I'll send you the video clip. Good.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see what happens with the Dallas Mavericks, led by Mr. Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis. I don't think that they're going to make the playoffs this year. If they do, good for them. So peace.